All right, so there have been some students who've been posting inappropriate content on our Habit of Mind journal thing. No, I'm just kidding. None of you are doing that. But we still want to actually like authenticate that people are who they say they are as they create their Habit of Mind journal entries. Okay. And we can do that by leveraging Google authentication, which is a feature that many of our web apps that we'll work on next semester use, not all of them. Some of that code I've written for you and it's in our starter code, but I want to show you how it connects not so much for like the Google authentication part, but more so how we can use Express's middleware to very efficiently do authentication, and for you to get some appreciation of how authentication works conceptually in terms of web applications and how it works with connect with cookies and things like that. So that's what I want to show you today. We're not going to write like the Google authentication code. That's already here. I'll show you where it is. We're going to focus on connecting it and more the Express middleware stuff. So we have a few little things to update, not too many. But the first thing we need to do is to go to server.js. This is where we've done all the major Express stuff. And we're going to use a new node module whose purpose is for maintaining a user session. When you go to a website, like when you go to like Amazon, it remembers like stuff about you. It remembers like pages you've been to. It remembers who you are, right? It stores that stuff on your web browser, in your web browser in a cookie. But it also does it in a secure fashion. And so that's what we're going to do together today. So after the database code here, doesn't really matter where we do this, but this is as good a place as any. We are going to import the Express session module, which is used to manage sessions. Okay. So we want to create a session when the user logs into our Habit of Mind journal app. And we're going to remember things about that user, for example, like their email. So when we write to the database, we can record who it's from. So we do this, we're going to get a reference to the session object here, and we're going to say require express.session. And then much like we've been using, so we did app.use here to say we want to be able to handle JSON and the HTTP request bodies. We did app.use here for static paths for our CSS images and JavaScript. We did an app.use here to connect our router. We're going to do another app.use. And what we're going to use here is we're going to call this session function to create our session. And I think this is good. Yeah, I like that. So when we call the session function, we pass an object, and that object has three properties. It has a secret, which we're about to define. Resave will set to false, save uninitialized will set to false. This secret is what's used to encrypt the user session in the cookie in the browser. Okay. So what you need to do now is to go create we're going to create this session secret. So I'm going to pause our video here. So we'll come back to the cookie thing in a moment. What I do want to do is a couple of other edits while we're here. Is this is great that now we're keeping track of a user session, but we also want to make sure like our users actually authenticate themselves before we let them start to do things like anything on our web app, right? We only want authenticated users to access our Habits of Mind journal app, not just anyone. So we're going to go down here after we've done the static paths thing. And we're going to add another piece of middleware here. Another app.use. So to explain a little bit more of this app.use thing, so app.use takes a function that is added to the chain of a request. So all this app.use stuff is like one function after another that gets called whenever a request comes into our web server. Okay, so that means it's going through the session thing, it's going through all this static stuff. We can leverage this um, to do authentication. Oops, that is not what I wanted. When we call next, which we're going to do in a moment here, it goes to the next function in the chain. And we can leverage this behavior to do all the authentication for all of the routes in one place, which is huge. So we'll do app.use, and we're going to pass a function here. And it's going to be asynchronous because we need to do some database stuff. The function that we pass to app.use takes 3 parameters, a request, a response, and next, which is a reference to the function that will be called next. So here's our arrow function. Inside of here, we want to check if the user is already logged in or if the student is already logged in. So we'll say if the student is already logged in, fetch the student object from the database. So if the student has authenticated, then we're good to go. Otherwise, we're going to send them off to authenticate. Okay, so we're going to say if rec.session, so we're using that session middleware, that cookie, if the email is really equal to undefined and the path where we're headed, so rec.path dot starts with, if we're not heading to the auth path, then we're going to redirect them to the auth page and we're going to return. Otherwise, we're just going to call next. So this comment is not very clear. I don't like this comment, actually. So we're going to say, if the student is not already logged in, redirect all requests to the authentication page. That's a more descriptive comment. So we know if they're logged in or not, because when they do log in, we're going to populate in the cookie, the encrypted cookie, their email. So if we haven't done that, send them to the authentication page. I sometimes forget the second half, and then I get stuck in this infinite loop where I'm constantly redirecting the user to the authentication page, but they were already headed to the authentication page. So we do need to check, like, if they're not going to the page, then we want them to authenticate. Otherwise, let them actually authenticate. All right, super cool. We're almost done with this, which is kind of neat. So yeah. Maybe it doesn't need to be asynchronous. Let's get rid of it and see what happens. I think based on the comment that I had previously, I was doing something differently originally and then realized like that's not a good solution and changed it, but left the async in. So I think it's not needed. All right, we can almost run this, but not quite. So let's go to router.js. And we just have to connect this to some of the code that I've already provided you, and I'll show you that in a second. So at the near the bottom of this, we are simply going to delegate all authentication requests to a different file. So delegate all authentication to the auth.js router. So we just do route.use. Perfect. So any endpoint that's /auth, we're going to send it off to auth.js, which is already provided for us. So let me show you a little bit about what that does. Um, oh wait, let's actually use the email too. So this does the authentication. We hard coded our email up here. Now we can actually use the email from the session. So we can say rec.session.email because now we can refer to that session object to get things like the user's email. So it's not hard coded to us anymore, which is great. All right, so let's just take a quick look at a couple files here. Here's auth.js. Um, this is pretty much code that just comes from like Google. Google tells us how to do Google authentication, um, and we use their code. You can even see here. Here's the link if you're curious to read more about Google authentication. So like I didn't have to figure this all out. I read their documentation, and I'm doing all the stuff that's needed. The one thing here that's like custom. Um, well, I mean, there's a couple custom things, but the key aspect here is when we get the payload back from Google, there's a lot of information in it, and we're going to log like the user token, which is sub here, and we're going to log the email. We're extracting that. We could get other information like first name, last name, things like that, but we're getting the email out of this verify function because we're going to use it to store it in the session right here. When the user has successfully logged in. So here's the think about all of this code authenticates the user and stores their email in the session. That's the point of all of this. I also made an auth.ejs file for us that is the login page. Again, I didn't write this from scratch. I copied most of this from developers.google.com, which told me how to build out the page with the little Google button. I just added some header footer stuff here to make it work for our website. So pretty straightforward. Um, and then in styles.css, was there already some code here? Yeah, so this code was already here. This is just for the authentication so that it's formatted nicely. I think I probably got that from developer.google.com too. I don't think I came up with that on my own. And then the final piece of code that's needed, um, I have two different auth files here. I have a feeling I forgot to get rid of the old one. Let me check really quick. Where's our EJS file? To do auth.js. Okay, so I did forget to get rid of the old one. Um, Sorry about that. You can delete auth2.js. That should not have been in your starter code. My mistake. Um, we're using auth.js. Google changed their authentication stuff within the last year, so I had to rewrite this. Um, but this is just basically to send the credentials to our server to be verified. So the nice thing is, if you're doing like a new web application, you can just take all of these files from our Habit of Mind journal and embed it in your new web application, and then you'll be good to go. So you don't need like a bunch of extra stuff. Um, Hold questions for 1 second. I just want to see if it runs, and then we'll get things answered. So if I refresh this, so if I refresh now, you'll notice it automatically redirects me from the index page to the auth page. There's a sign in with Google button. Oh my goodness, it's going to make me actually type everything in. I have a lot of authentication stuff to go through. All right, but eventually you get signed into journal. Oh, it put me back here again. That's not a good sign. Let me try again. As teachers, we have all this duo stuff too. It still put me back here. I have a lot of cookies now. Huh. All right, let's try to figure